All right, after playing the game posted up above this video, you may think it's pretty simple, and it's not terribly hard, and you could probably code it yourself, but I'm going to show you some things that you can do, some new things that you can use to really make intricate programs and games moving forward. So there's actually a lot of cool stuff in here that you might not be able to pick out and maybe looks a little bit more straightforward than it actually is. So here, just get started with a little form, target game icon. I got a button, start button. I'm not going to make this thing look pretty till the end. Just going to get the functionality working. So just like we did with the other game, when I press start, I want to start the game. So if I click the start button, I'm just going to get rid of the start button, or at least make it invisible. You'll remember last game, whenever we're doing games and stuff, we typically use a timer to update our game. So I will just call this TMR game loop. Enabled false to start, interval 16 to give me kind of that 60 frame per second update. And of course, when I start the game, I do want to start the game loop, right? I do want to enable this game loop. So I'm going to go TMR game loop enabled equals true. And of course my game has nothing in it right now, but it's ready to basically begin, and we can start coding this game. All right, the first thing I want to talk about that is fairly new is if you played the game, the targets are spawning in, and I can't remember what I set it to. Maybe it's different. I'm probably going to change it by the end of the video. But the targets are spawning in basically like at a set interval. Let's keep it simple. Let's say the targets are spawning in every second. So how can you keep track of time? How can you write code to do something every second? I could have another timer with an interval of 1,000. Which would be 1 second. I don't want another timer. I only want one timer. It's not good practice. It gets too confusing. So I'm going to go back into my code, and I'm going to use a new tool that we've never used before. And this new tool looks like your random tool. It looks like your sound player tool, which are all just classes, but we're not quite ready for that yet. So I'm going to introduce you to a pretty straightforward tool. I'm going to call it's the stopwatch tool, the stopwatch class. And we all know what a stopwatch does in real life. It keeps track of time. So you can let the IntelliSense do the work for you. You can see it looks very familiar to our random class or our sound player class. Yeah, and this is this stopwatch tool. Basically, we can use to keep track of time and stuff like that. Pretty self-explanatory. It is called a stopwatch after all. Now this is the name, and you're always free to name your tool whatever you want. And in the interest of this game, I'm going to use this first stopwatch to keep track of the time since last target spawn. Which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's very descriptive, and anyone reading my code knows exactly what this stopwatch's purpose is for. It's clearly to keep track of how much time has passed since we've spawned another target for the player to click, or whatever it may be that you want to do with your game. So what I need to do is basically, we've created this stopwatch, right? If I pull up a stopwatch here, we've created the stopwatch. Oh my gosh, needs an update. Yeah, we can all imagine a stopwatch. And when I start the game, I also want to start the stopwatch, right? Because we need to keep track of how much time has passed since a target has spawned. So if I press the start button, I'm going to take this stopwatch that has this intricate name, and I'm going to hit it with the .start method. So the stopwatch is going to start ticking. There we go. It's not a timer, it's a stopwatch, right? So it starts at 0. So as soon as I hit the start button, the stopwatch is going to start to count. Okay? And you don't need to do this, but just actually, yeah, we don't need to do that. You guys are smart enough to handle what's going on with this line of code. All right, so the game is being played, or the game has started, and I've got this stopwatch going. I want to start spawning some targets. Now, that's going to be happening in the game loop, right? Because the game loop is updating my game. And when do I want to start the... when do I want to spawn my first target? Well, I want to spawn it if the time since the last target spawn, so if my stopwatch has reached a second. Okay? So when I start my stopwatch, as soon as it hits a second, I want to spawn a target. So how do I do this with this stopwatch tool? Well, I'm going to say the stopwatch, which is named time since last target spawn, but what specifically about the stopwatch? So I'm going to go dot, and you'll see the first method that pops up is elapsed milliseconds. Remember, our timer worked in milliseconds, and our stopwatch by default likes to work in milliseconds too. So if the total amount of milliseconds on this stopwatch has reached a second, I want to spawn a target. Now you should remember that 1 second is 1,000 milliseconds. So I'm checking to see if the stopwatch has reached 1,000 milliseconds. Now there's a couple issues with this if statement. We shouldn't be checking if it's completely equal to 1,000. We should be checking if it's equal to 1,000 or has went over 1,000. Oops. So we're checking if it's greater than or equal to 1,000. That's going to help us with some problems if we didn't do that. And we just had a unit where we didn't like these numbers just chilling, right? These magic numbers that don't mean anything to anyone else except you. So I'm going to take this at 1,000 and I'm going to make a variable. I'm going to say int target spawn delay equals 1,000. And this variable basically says we want 1,000 milliseconds, which is also just 1 second, before a new target can spawn. So yes, this is equal to 1,000. So instead of just having 1,000 chilling right there, I want to put the target spawn delay in there. I didn't change the code. I didn't change the functionality of the code. I definitely changed the readability. This is a much better if statement. All right. The last thing I want to talk about in this first part is functions. You've used functions in AppLab. You'll remember in the first game you made, this timer got really messy with a lot of code. So I'm going to use functions to keep my code organized. So this if statement we created for the sole purpose of spawning a target. So I'm going to create a spawn target function. And anytime I want to create a function in this course, I'm going to go private void, and then I'm going to name my function whatever I want. So I'm going to say spawn target. Empty set of parentheses, open up a pair of braces. You've just created a function. This is like a task. This function will perform a specific task. Obviously, we have no code in here yet, so this function does nothing. However, once it does spawn the target, I want to call this function from this if statement. So my timer is running. We are checking if 1,000 milliseconds have passed, or we're checking how much time has passed, and we're checking if it's been more than 1,000 milliseconds. Then we're going to spawn a target in our game. All right. I didn't let you do much coding on this first part, but don't worry, you'll be doing a lot on the second part. But at least you now know about stopwatch to keep track of how much time has passed. And we're getting into functions, which are going to make your code a lot more readable and easy to stay organized and stuff like that.